We enter our second session called Radical Hospitality, Hosting Without Mastery. And the moderator of this session is Jude Debia, who's an acclaimed writer, editor, cultural programmer, whose work explores themes of exile, belonging, gender, and the politics of visibility. A former Icon guest writer and author of several novels. Jude is based in Malmö, Sweden, and he currently works as a coordinator, Sanctuary Initiative for Artists and Writers at Risk, while continuing to mentor emerging voices across Africa and the diaspora. So welcome here, Jude, to the Safe Havens 2025.
Thank you, Rita, and I would like to say hello and welcome to everyone. Completely glad that you're here joining us for this interesting session. This session explores, or rather I would say the title first, it's Radical Hospitality, Hosting Without Mastery. This session explores a question that is both philosophical and deeply practical. What does it mean to truly welcome someone? Not just to offer them a space, but to offer dignity, autonomy, the freedom to belong without condition. Philosopher Jacques Derrida described hospitality as a paradox. On one hand, there's conditional hospitality, the kind we see in most institutions, cities, and even homes, where welcome comes with terms, expectations, and rules. On the other hand, there's the ideal of unconditional hospitality, a radical openness that asks us to receive the other without control or any kind of mastery. In today's conversation, we will explore how these ideas play out in the real world, in artist residencies, in cultural institutions, in political frameworks, and in the everyday language we use to describe those we host. We're incredibly fortunate to be joined by three remarkable panelists whose work offers unique and critical perspectives. As you've met KAGISO earlier, KAGISO Lesego Molope, whose novels and plays explore survival, exile, and self-making, especially through the lens of Black womanhood and the chosen distance from home. We have as well SANDI HILAL, whose projects such as Al-Madhafah and Campus and Camps rethink refugee spaces as sites of agency and repositions the guest as hosts, flipping the power dynamics in a beautifully radical way. And last but not least, we have Beata Hovind, whose work with Future Library and public art curation teaches us how to trust, long-term vision, and shared authorship that can shape more sustainable, imaginative models of hospitality. Together, and welcome all of you, together we'll explore how hospitality can move beyond the language of charity or control towards something more, relational, more collaborative, and ultimately more just. Thank you for being here. So we'll begin. Let's begin with the core paradox at the heart of this discussion. Derrida describes hospitality as always torn between generosity of welcome and the sovereignty of control. You've each engaged in very specific ways with questions of space, belonging, and power. So to begin, I would like to just throw like a simple open question that will get everybody kind of like an icebreaker question. How do you personally define or experience the tension between conditional and unconditional hospitality in your work? And where have you seen that tension most clearly, exposed? This is just a general question. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in, KAGISO or Beata or SANDI. The question again is, how do you personally define or experience the tension between conditional and unconditional hospitality in your work or life?
I can begin if you would like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in some way, I propose to begin because I really feel that that is almost at the heart of my work, and especially at the heart of my work when I moved to Europe, indeed, because I was previously working in Palestine. We co-founded our practice in Palestine, particularly in Bet Sahur, which is in Bethlehem area, West Bank. And indeed, also we did different projects in Gaza, and therefore, unfortunately, I cannot begin before actually recognizing that we are in this moment witnessing genocide in Gaza, and also witnessing a bit of a loss of memories, of heritage, of homes. And indeed, maybe I would like to remind myself and you about moments where actually hospitality has been major for me. And indeed, I would also claim that the projects I am doing in Europe has been so much inspired by places like Gaza, and especially refugee camps, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, where indeed I was always extremely surprised of the insisting of people especially in refugee camps, to host. And indeed, actually, sometimes you will enter in their homes, and you might even see them going and borrow some sugar from the neighbor. And you would ask yourself why they would really insist almost in offering us coffee while they barely have it themselves. And that question actually really haunted me always in that sense. And slowly, also in conversation, I realized that indeed when they were hosting, they are treated as numbers in the public, and suddenly when they begin to host us, they are humans again. So they gain their humanity, and therefore it's in here that I would like to recognize the power of hosting as a political agency that brings us back certain humanity, right? So in that sense, that is a major part. And here, maybe I would like to move to your question about Derrida, because that was my really sort of first encounter. And I have to admit that I would like to begin by saying that I am very skeptical around the condition of unconditional hospitality, and I will try to explain why. And maybe I would like to borrow one of the Islamic hadith that has been very important for me. I will say it first in Arabic and then translate it into English, that says, الضيافة ثلاثة أيام وما بعد فصدقة. That means hospitality is for 3 days, and after that it is charity. So by turning it into unconditional hospitality, so in Arabic culture, we understand that you can host with such generosity for maximum 3 days. And I always try to say it's similar to Christmas, right? Where people, or to certain festivities, where people try to get the best out of themselves for a few days, but then they will return back to their normal lives, right?
Exactly.
And in that sense, the same is hospitality for Arabs, even though they are considered among the most hospitable. Derrida himself actually brought in his book the desert and the Arabs being unconditional hosts. But Arab says you can be unconditional hosts for 3 days. After that, it's no way you continue in that kind of hospitality and generosity. The 4th day, you become a neighbor. And indeed, once you become a neighbor, you negotiate everything. So in that sense, for the ones of you that know very well Derrida, when he brings host and hostages, we have host and hostages in Arabic in neighboring, not in hosting, because after the 3rd day, you become a neighbor, and therefore justice, injustice,
the power dynamics kind of changes.
Comes in the neighboring, in the moment that you become part of that community, equal part of that community, and therefore you react. And therefore my skeptical part, and I will finish here, my skeptical part of the unconditional hospitality is that the moment you make it beyond 3 days, there is no way if it will not become a power using dynamics. And it's seen, I see that very strongly by many rhetoric in the public European countries, where if you do not behave, you are not welcomed. And to keep people guests forever is to keep them hostages forever. And when you propose a simple proposal of a white man philosopher of saying, I propose unconditional hospitality, that means that you still hold the power, and you understand that you cannot hold the power in such very blind way. So you would propose unconditional hospitality as a way to be generous, and says, you know what, even if I will hold the power, at the end of the day, maybe I am the most generous man in the room, and therefore I would argue that the unconditional hospitality is about using the whole
power
forever.
Thank you so much. I've not seen anyone describe the tension so clearly like you have. So that was a very good one. Anbieta or Kagiso, do you have any contributions to this particular question on how do you personally define or experience the tension between conditional and unconditional?
Yeah, so
Okay, let's
you start,
with
Kagiso.
Yeah, Kagiso.
Okay,
yeah.
So I think I can kind of start where Sandy left off, because the question of conditional hospitality is a bit it's a bit tricky for me to kind of work with, because so in my culture, you know, people talk a lot about Ubuntu all over the world, but it's not really it's not something that's easy to define in English, which is, I think, the reason why people really get confused about it. But so I come from a place of displacement, in that our people were displaced from where we were before, when the land was stolen by the colonizer. So similar to Palestinians, you know, we lived in that place where it wasn't really our home, but the land was ours, right? So we were put away, displaced and put away into this space where we were sort of like a crowded space, right? Like not enough space for everybody to be in, not, the land is not fertile. So conditions of struggle, under apartheid. So where Ubuntu comes in is that there isn't such a thing as power over another human being. All humans are equal. So whenever we share space, we're sharing our humanity, we're honoring each other's humanity. And that means there is no power. That means that there isn't someone who is hosting and someone who is the guest. So we're all sort of in this space together, struggling to be to uphold our dignity in these conditions of strife. So I find conditional hosting, conditional hospitality, to me, is a very Western
ideology
concept, right? It's a very Western concept to me. So I feel I try at all times to always be going back to where I come from, in that I think of hospitality as creating spaces where honoring each other's humanity is the ideal. It's our first responsibility to our fellow human beings. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that also makes a lot of sense. And I like that you drew from your history and, you know, also aligning it with the Gaza story as well. It makes it so clear. Anna, Beata, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, well, I also think that made it so clear. I've never thought about it that way. So it was putting everything into perspective. But I have to admit, I was even struggling myself to find, because I find nothing almost impossible to be unconditional for some reason. So I couldn't find up any answer to your question at first. But I never thought about the 3-day perception, but that really makes sense, because things are changing, right, after 3 days. So you have to see that power balance. I think for me, working with art in public space, and for instance, I work with the Future Library, which is a 100-year lasting art project. There is a lot of close to unconditional, at least, within that project, since we are creating space for others and letting go of the control. Like there is a forest growing that is 100% public available, and anyone can use it, anyone can be there. So I think that's at least close to unconditional.
and also this public space, a special design room in the future in the public library in Oslo, which is also publicly available. It's not regulated except for the opening hours, but it is used in a way that we constantly have a negotiation between me and the public, like, should it be regulated? Should we have a gate? Because I mean, we use it differently, but then if we close it or we have a gate where you need a key, you are already in the conditions, right? That there are only certain ways you can behave in that frame. But yeah, so I think the elements of future library when it comes to unconditional, I guess, is more about having all these authors writing manuscripts that are gifted to the coming generations. It's not for us, which is another way of seeing it. And also, so it's more, and I think I just want to bring it in, which is an ongoing exercise for me personally, but everyone involved, is that having to trust the circumstances, the people, that it will actually happen after I'm dead, you know, so that at least it brings a lot of discussions and questions to the table that are it's mind-provoking in that way. Even our perception of time, that, you know, the long-termism, when you're forced to think 100 years, because this project lasts for 100 years, you are forced to go beyond your own lifetime. You are not building for your own sake. You're so, and it's, yeah, so there's a lot of at least in that way I can bring things to the table. But thank you for bringing the situation in Gaza, Sandy.
Yeah, thank you so much. And speaking about authors and writing, next question is directly for KAGISO. KAGISO, your novels are layered with themes of silence, survival, and the interior lives of characters negotiating what it means to belong, sometimes by leaving. You've also spoken about your writing as a kind of chosen exile, a step away from expectations, even home. In the context of today's theme, I wonder, and this is the question, how might hospitality in an institutional or narrative sense serve not only as shelter, but as a place for re-narrating oneself, especially for artists who exist at multiple intersections of displacement? I know you spoke about displacement earlier. So what roles does language play in how we host or frame those who arrive?
It's interesting that you speak of language, because I was listening to Anna Behata and I was thinking about how language plays such a huge role in how, not only in terms of hospitality, just in terms of how we relate to one another in any given space. So one thing that's very tricky for me is that I write in English, yeah? And English is not my first language. English is like my fourth or fifth language. And there are places I can't go with that language because it's not mine and I don't know how to hold it. I know how to hold myself and my fellow human beings better in my language. And that means that there are things I can't do in literature. There are ways in which I can't use literature to really explore what it means, what hospitality means. Like there are ways that we speak of hospitality in my language that there aren't in English, or that I at least can't access, right? So I find I'm always living in translation as I write in translation, right? But you know, there are rules around how we treat our guests, how we host, and all of that in my language. And rules that, you know, they come with proverbs and all these things that I can't actually share with the world because I can't share my language, you know. So I take refuge in like language, but only in ways that I can't share. As I say, I can't do it with my work. So the best I can do is sort of explain the rules. But in terms of home, I feel I've come to learn, like for a really long time, I was trying to understand what exile is and what home means. And I think for a long time, I was kind of moving around the world trying to find places that felt like home. And then I came to the conclusion that really home is just feeling safe, right? And I think being a good host and as well as being a good guest, of being in a sharing space is about safety at the core of it, right? Whether you're in your home of origin, whether you're in a refugee camp, whether you're displaced within your own country, I think what it comes down to is finding safety, and safety is what home is to me. And I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, in a way you did. I was also looking at when I talk about narrative sense as well, I was thinking about all these books by authors from a diaspora that we get to read, where rather than writing about the place they are, they write about the place they've left. It's
yeah,
almost like they're bringing that language over and the stories over to,
yeah,
create some sort of comfort and, and create an artificial kind of home as well. And
yeah,
also language in the sense of how we use language, the most basic language to define people. Like like I would take from what Sandy said, when you talk about host and guest, already there's a power play there. Who is the host? Who is the guest? Who has more power? And after 3 days, if the guest is no longer a guest and becomes a neighbor, you equalize the terms of which we use to describe people. But as long as you continue to have hosts and guests and refugees and, the language that we use to define people from other places also kind of plays a role in how we actually position ourselves.
yeah. And I think that's what muddies the water for me, because as I said at the beginning, that for me this is just the English language. But when I think host and guest, even in my language, for example, we will say like, so my name is KAGISO, right, which means peace, right? And Huagisana is to like live together. And so so in my language, I only use, this is where it muddies the water, because in my language, there is no word for guest and host. It's not, so I only use these terms because
You
that's,
speak English,
yeah.
exactly.
But I think what I'm trying to convey is that in my mind, I'm speaking in my language, even though I'm expressing it in English. But okay, yeah. So I think, the welcomer and the welcomed and that kind of thing. And I think I agree that we need to shift the terms, and then we can even within English, move from saying guest and host to like, like sort of something that would be more like fellow,
Exactly. Some
or
sort of equality of how we use the
yeah.
terms. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and for example, in my language, the word for neighbor is the fellow builder, right? So terms like that, I think we probably need, because we are in the process of redefining what hospitality is, then we're going to have to use different language even at the very beginning, and
Exactly.
and in redefining it, we're gonna have to reimagine the language is what I want to come to. Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's exactly what I wanted you to reach to that point. So that's great. And to the audience as well, if you have questions, you can actually type your questions in the chat box and we can read that afterwards. Now I'd like to move to Sandy. You've been very quiet for a while. So Sandy, your work has been deeply influential in shifting how we think about space and power. In Al-Madhafah, I hope I pronounced that well, you challenge the classic host-guest dynamic by inviting displaced people to become hosts themselves, to create spaces of dignity and exchange rather than waiting rooms for silence. So with that in mind, how does spatial practice and I mean like design, innovation, positioning, reshape who holds power in hospitality, and what does it take to design hospitality not just as a gesture, but as a political form, especially when host institutions often operate from positions of privilege. And I know you have an experience as not being an institution per se, but a private host kind of thing. But I would like you to just tackle this for us. So I would take the question again. How does spatial practice, design, innovation, positioning reshape who holds power in hospitality? And what does it take to design hospitality not just as a gesture, but as a political form?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. And I would like even to follow from what has been said so far, because it's really beautiful.
Great.
We are
Yeah.
almost helping each other to build over the conversation. And I do agree, actually, that if we will only use English languages, it would be harder to understand. And indeed, for me, the moment my body is somewhere else, I try to understand where it is. And indeed, for me, the project of the Madhafah, which is the living room and the role of the living room in society as such, is a very Swedish and also by consequence European sort of based project, because when I arrived to Sweden, my question was how my living room would look like. It was easy when I was in Palestine that my living room was at the intersection between the private and the public. Actually, how it was even designed, I mean, in the Arab world, we have so many words for these spaces at the intersection between the public and the private. And I would only mention few, which is one is the title of the project, which is Al-Madhafah, but we have Diwan, we have Majlis, we have Maq'ad, we have so many words for these places at the intersection between the private and the public. Well, I would arrive to Sweden. Sweden is a very modern society with a strong modern architecture. And one thing that modernity did very precisely and very sharply is to separate the public from the private with a very, very sharp line. And any possibility of creating things in the middle is seen as a rupture in the system, to the point that, you know, I have been working with my husband. We turned our house into a residency, artistic residency in Palestine for 10 years. We wrote books together. And then when we arrived to Sweden, we realized that we cannot actually work with each other because we are sort of sharing also a private space. And they actually impose on us a separation in the bodies, because we cannot work together as a wife and husband, otherwise that would be seen as a corruption. So anything, even from the intimacy to the up to the, so my struggle in Sweden became, what does it mean, how I would, what I would use as a word, how I would demodern a modernity that is imposing on me either to act as a private person or as a public figure. While for me, that is the potentiality of hospitality, is that possibility of creating a space where you become a public figure in your own way, within your neighborhood, among your friends, among other people. And indeed, that is for me a real democracy, because in some way, what we do, how do we use hospitality in the Arab world? I mean, some people that have time and that know that there is a need of spaces in the city or in the villages, they would say, I will open my living room from 4 to 6, because that person, that woman, that man, that person have 3 hours as a in his time, and he would open up that for hospitality. And hospitality doesn't come for nothing. I mean, by doing that, that person become a notable person in the community. He become known. He would begin slowly to figure out conflict, to become the space where people will go. And people will actually entitle you or disentitle you to become a public figure. Because if they will come and give you more sort of power and possibilities, then you are a public figure. If they don't do that, you don't have that possibility. And for me, at least in the Arab world, for me, the most form of democracy is formed through that space in between the private and the public. That
And the
is
public,
the physical space where things are actually feeding both in here and then in there. And to come into a place like Sweden that is actually claiming that democracy and not to find that place that produce political agency was shocking for me. And I'm still processing that shocking with all kinds of projects that I can ever do. So that is like, in short, what I am. I am behind that spaces that creates political agency that I fortunately did not find in Sweden. And the ability of self-determination and self-creation is very much reduced in places like Scandinavian countries. And for me, that was my real contribution to places like Sweden.
But I'm a bit I would like you to speak a bit more about the I want to say this in Arabic again, Al-Madhafah, because what you've also described is we can use spaces of hospitality as a strong political expression as well. Yeah. And your shock really is that in Sweden, there's this bit of separation. And like you said, it's very sharp. Like there's the private and then there is something else. And so, yeah, maybe also just give us a bit more, because I love what you're saying.
Yeah. So let me give you a very, very small example that maybe will explain. I arrived to a place like Boden, where I was commissioned by the Public Art Agency, which is a state agency from in Sweden, to work with refugees there. And my first intuition was what refugees is lacking is a space where they can exercise their political agency. And in there, to make a very long story short, that is where I felt that that they have a possibility of building that political agency through hospitality. So what I did as an architect is to actually, instead of doing a project of art outside, as it was mainly imagined as to do sculpture or something, I decided that my project of art is to actually borrow a place that is in a building of a refugee building where refugees are transitionally living. I opened it up by making it completely glass and by making it very clear at the ground floor, where it became a place where any refugees that actually would even arrive in the north, because it became so very well known as a room. And each Saturday from 12 in the afternoon until 12 in the night, each Saturday there is a host that would claim the place among refugees. And that actually make it so strong in the north, because people had not to wait so long until they begin to understand from where they would begin. So the living room, such tiny space of 60 meters square, turned to be into the place where whoever will arrive as a new arrival to Boden and its surrounding would come to the living room and know that they can host each Saturday. They did not stop there. They began to invite politicians, and they immediately realized is that if they are offering hospitality to politicians out of a host situation, so they are the one hosting. So politicians would arrive, they would feed them Syrian food, Afghani food, they would manage the discussion themselves. And they told me always, it's so different if the politicians are visiting us in our home, in our room, with our smells and with our food. They feel a little bit uncomfortable, they feel not sure about everything, rather than us going to their offices, right? That is a major part. So, and from there, like in the living room in the refugee houses, to a living room at the threshold of the museum in the Van Abbe Museum in the Netherlands, to the living room in a library in Malmo, so I actually activate these spaces everywhere. The main thing is that main two conditions that needs to be having is that it should be between the public and the private. So it should be at the intersection between, so to give space to that public and private, and it should be hosted by what is considered eternal guests in these spaces. So these are, and the moment you begin to activate them, it's magic. The way that it turns political agency is always astonishing me on how much potential is in there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
so much.
Can I
We will,
say
yeah, KAGISO quickly, because I need to jump to Anbiata as well, but KAGISO, go ahead.
No, I'm seeing all these links between what Annabeata and Sandy do, and I think it would just be so incredibly interesting to have Anna. I'm not trying to moderate, but to have Annabeata follow up on that, because in terms of architecture and hosting and hospitality, I've experienced one of her spaces, so I think it would be so cool to hear, the ideas.
So quickly, Annabeata, do you want to react to that before I toss my question to you?
Yeah, I'd like to, because I'm born in Sweden.
Yeah.
So I just have to, and but I'm Norwegian after all. But I was thinking, but first of all, I think I just love to be challenged on a way of living, because I think I kind of experienced that through my whole childhood, growing up, that this privacy in Norway is so strong, and that is also part of our built environment, but it's also very much embedded in our culture, the division between privacy. And I know a lot of people coming from different countries, like refugees, or you don't even have, from any country outside Nordic, I think, that we have those hytte, which is a cabin in the mountains, and you will never become integrated before you've been invited to one Norwegian's hytte, but it's a extremely private space. So I have a hytte, and I share it with people. So anytime you can have that hytte, because I'm trying my way to approach this ownership or claiming it in a different way. Yeah, I think there are lots of similarities, Sandy, and I think there are two foreigners coming from not from Norway or Sweden that has I commissioned, and they both created. One is Katie Patterson. She created Future Library. That is an extremely generous project in many ways, but it's also this other project, which is an urban farm. And and in the middle of that urban farm is a bakehouse, and it's been claimed now by different kind of people, and the dynamic that you're describing is unfolding there every week, because the hosting is different and it's on their premises. It's not on the municipality or somebody else's premises. It's the people that are there that day that are hosting, and they're working together on the farm, and they have meals together. So I think, but I constantly deal with the tension you're describing, and I think, but from my perspective, it's at least acknowledging this tension happening, these power structures, at least makes it easier to try to minimize them, or try to rock them around, if I can put it that way, change the dynamic. That it makes it visible. So I think this is so important to articulate this, so that you can actually see the asymmetry and what's happening.
So this brings me to your question quickly, and I will from there get back to KAGISO. But Anbiata, your work with Future Library is often described as visionary, a project rooted in patience, trust, and long-term thinking. In contrast to fast transactional models, your work invites future generations into a kind of shared authorship. So the question I'm trying to land here is, what might radical hospitality look like if we adopted the same long view thinking you bring to art curation? How can cities or institutions begin to host artists, not just for survival, but for futures they may never fully control?
Yeah, well, it's a big question. Thank you. I can't answer it, but I can try to start to answer it.
Yes,
you know, Future Library lasts for 100 years. That in itself is so challenging, because we don't think in 100 years. Of course, it's almost impossible for us to imagine that what will happen in 100 years at the moment. And so I think, for instance, on a practical note, what I managed is to get a 100-year contract from the politicians. They've never done that before. So it's across budgets, it's across elections, and not even across political interests, that they managed to commit that we will have the room in the public library for 100 years, where the secret manuscripts of, at this moment, 12 authors, and also the forest. So I think at least it shows, it's an example that is actually possible to commit across these lines. And I think trusting, letting go of control is maybe what Sandy is also explaining, that when you are reorganizing a living room, like you said, it's really about letting go of control. When you're giving the host role is going around different people, you have to let go of the control, and there's a lot. Some people will think there's a lot of risk to it, you know. They will, and that's why they will hesitate to do so. But I think all this letting go of not being in control for 100 years is also a way of really letting go of control and exercise that at least.
Interesting. Okay, KAGISO wanted to, okay. I will take KAGISO first and then Sandy.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is such an incredibly interesting discussion for me, because all three of us, we come from such different cultures. In terms of this, in terms of space, physical space, in Stwana culture, when you build a home, you also build a home. So you build your home, the place where you go and sleep and eat and make food and whatever. And then, but you also, within your yard, you build a place called Lapa, which is also a home, which also, it's two homes. And so there's the outside space and the inside space. So every family has that. But the outside space is specifically it's specifically a welcoming place. So that would be something like a living room in Western culture, but it's for outside living, but it's also understood that it's a community space, right?
Yeah.
So every family has a family space and a community space. So and I think that's for me, it's like a really it's always been so beautiful to know that there is a community space in everybody's
compound or
everybody's
something.
home.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think when we reimagine hospitality, things like that could come into mind, because I feel that in terms of like architecture, as both Sandy and Anabiata have been talking, that reimagining spaces, but also kind of reimagining spaces in a way that we include many different cultures, ways of living, I think would be most just more like a sort of universal way of thinking about hospitality. Because everybody can bring in their own cultural everything that works, from your cultural background. Yeah.
That's a good point. Sandy, you want to say something quickly?
Yeah, actually, I'm almost overwhelmed of how many amazing stuff is coming out of this. And when we met before, we thought that we will never get annoyed, but I think it's even more than this. I would love to continue thinking with both of you, because in some way, it's true. I always imagine how nice a democratic society would be if there are so many living rooms that are hosting, rather than, for me, the public space is simply one big living room that hosted by the state, right? Where we are all included as guests. But imagine how nice a society would be if we have, also in the Arab world, we have always that room a little bit outside that is, for me, when I say at the intersection between the private and the public, that is like a community room, right? You are in here and there. And maybe, I was so fascinated by having this 100-year contract, because in some way, actually, that is a little bit blowing my mind, because somehow, I think, the living room in Boden, after 4 years of becoming so important for so many people, a migration officer that never talked with any of us decided that they need the space. And they took away a 60-meter square space that was not used for 1.5 years. So this whole thing, we need the space, was not really real, but I think they did not handle being guests in their own homes. And actually, it's not about demanding to be a host, but it's also sometimes losing control in order to become a guest is fundamental for both. And if we don't do both ways, then there is no way. And indeed, actually, when the living room was closed, we were so devastated that I say openly in Sweden, you know, I don't trust anymore the public to do long-term projects, because if we put all that energy for it after 4 years without any public accountability, I mean, there was no public accountability. I don't know even the name of the migration officers that decide to do that. And there where I also went to a cabin in the forest, in the Swedish forest, and says, you belong to Sweden only if you have that cabin. So I bought that cabin with the acquisition of the living room from Moderna Mosaic to say it's open to everyone, so we all have that feeling of belonging. So I feel there are so
I love it.
you know, I love that. Is only to say that I would love to discuss that forever. There are
you know, but how time flies, because we are already getting to the open session. I would ask one more question to the whole of you. I had more, but time is not our friend today. So this is my final question to the three of you. If you could propose one radical, risky, perhaps impossible gesture of hospitality, something you've never seen an institution try, but believe would shift the conversation, what would it be?
Maybe repeating the question would give us
one
second.
Okay, I will say it more slowly. If you could, any of you, you know, open question, if you could propose one radical, risky, perhaps impossible gesture of hospitality, something you've never seen in any institution before or any institution try, but believe would shift the conversation, what would it be? You know, we've spoken of structures, we've spoken of language, we've spoken of inclusivity, we've spoken on a lot of things. What would it be?
I have a suggestion. Actually,
so keep it short. Keep it short. Yeah.
Very, very, very short. Actually, I would like to have institution in each time we are entering any room for a public conversation or anything to say who is hosting in the room and how this hosting is taking place. So I would like to know power structures in the room, something that it's never clear for me.
Okay. Who wants to go next?
Well, Sandy's more of an artist. I'm a producer, but I want to say something that in Oslo at the moment, there's a very strong debate on developing the immigrant district where I'm sitting right now, because we have a live theater here, and which I belong to, and the developers have for first time really experienced that the neighborhood is standing up and fighting. And they're not acknowledging the power structure, the differences. So it's like it's too harmonic if you're consensus oriented, and I think they're totally wrong. So I totally agree with you, Sandy. If we could do that someone's hosting and someone is not, and always talk about power structure to clear out the air, you know, on what is actually unfolding. At the moment, that's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you. And KAGISO, any last words?
I agree. I mean, I think as I was talking before, what feels like home to me is safety. I think talking about power structures does give a sense of safety when you come in, to know who is hosting and who isn't. So for me, yeah, it always boils down to a feeling of safety for whoever is in the room. Sandy.
Okay.
Can I add also to you, because something I agree with you, safety is a major part to make us feel home, but I would add also justice is, for me, there is no justice, there is no home. So in some way, I think I say my home is made of both safetyness and justice.
Okay. So I'm officially throwing open the floor, because we have a lot of comments already coming in.